Afternoon. Well, it's good afternoon here in sunny San Francisco this morning, and I'm here with Tim, who's doing one of the modules for the health certification training. As you know, we've had the first webinar with Susie Smith, the second one with Robert Dills, and now it's our friend Tim Hallbom. Thank you and welcome, Tim.
I'm delighted to be here with you.
Thank you. Perhaps we could start with giving us a of the health certification training. Would that be okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, the health certification training, I think, began as an outgrowth of the book that Robert and Susie and I wrote together called Beliefs, Pathway to Health and Wellbeing. And we'd worked on that in the mid to late 1980s, and actually we got it published in 1990. When it came out, it was all about how you might approach health issues, or how do you work with health or well-being, and we covered things like how to work with allergies, or how to work with limiting beliefs and traumas. And after the book came out, we began to get a lot of calls from people saying, would you work with my mom? She's got cancer, or my brother has a heart condition.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to work with them? And of course, there's only three of us, and a lot of people were contacting us. So we began to refer to other people. So if somebody called and they go, my mom's got cancer. And I'd say, well, where do you live? And they'd say, Chicago. And I'd say, okay. I know a master practitioner in Chicago that this person could go see. And then they'd call the master practitioner, and the master practitioner, several of them called us and said, are you referring that person to me? That person has cancer. That's a physical thing. And so what we started to do was think, well, how can we really help a large number of people by understanding that, if you have a physical issue, it's just content in a sense. It's not different. Your mind and body are the same thing. And so our initial goal was to build a world health community where we'd have a number of people who were comfortable working with those issues, that would know how to approach those issues, that would begin to be like-minded in the sense that they were people that really wanted to help other people. So that's where it all began. And so we really developed this idea of a world health community where people, no matter where they were, would have some common understanding.
Yeah. And want to be part of a community as well.
And want to be part of a community as well.
Forward,
a lot of the exciting thing was we did it in Germany and Denmark and the United States and the UK and Mexico, and since then I've done it in a lot of other places, Brazil. And the Netherlands, what we found was people, NLPers with more advanced skills, tend to start having a lot in common. So, for example, if you were to meet somebody from Brazil who was an NLPer like you, you'd have more in common probably with him or her than you would with your next door neighbor back in the UK.
I call it being in the same library, if not reading the same book.
In the same library, I like that.
It's really good. And now, currently, the HCT is being delivered in Holland, Barcelona, and Japan.
Yeah, well, right now we're delivering this one here in San Francisco. It's also, we're looking at Barcelona, Holland. I think we have two scheduled for Holland.
19 and 20, yes.
And the nice thing about the one in Holland is that it's all in English, so if you don't speak the language of the country we're training in, that's a good place to go. Japan, we're doing one in Japan in 2021. I believe we're almost have one set up in Greece. It'll be more of a kind of a residential summer program, so people can tie a holiday in with that, and in Greece, which is lovely. The programs in Holland are all done in this beautiful wooded area, so I think it gives people a chance to connect in a natural environment. So those are ones planned at the moment. Of course, Mexico we do every other year as well.
Okay. So taking into account that the HCTs are founded on the presuppositions of NLP, and if you think of the two fields, how do you see that evolving going forward?
Well, I think if you think back to when we first started this and did our first program, which was in 1990, we had this much information about what to do with health or how you might do it. And I think we expanded the idea from health to more of a sense of health and well-being.
Yeah.
Because health is actually the challenge with the program has always been, I'll run into somebody who's I think, a very confident master practitioner, and I'll say, well, you need to take the health cert. And they'll say things like, well, I'm not that interested in, quitting smoking and fitness and the kind of things. And I'm sure that's what's happening in a health program.
Yeah.
And I say, no, health is about really, the health certification is really about building mastery. It's about taking your skills to the next level. And when you think of health and well-being, you can't really separate your physical self from your psycho-emotional self.
Yeah.
And well-being has to do with your well-being in systems, your well-being in your business, your well-being in your family life with your children, with your, with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this idea has expanded for people to really build those deeper skills in their entire life. And when I talk about, you talk about evolving, our deeper goal with the health certification program is to really build mastery, is to help people master the skills. And when we say mastery, it means that you know what you're doing, that you have an inner compass that's directing you as to what you're doing. You can in fact articulate typically what you're doing. So if somebody says, why did you just do that? You can answer it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times when you're learning NLP, and you're like a good master practitioner says, well, I don't know how I knew, I just had a sense.
Yeah.
But I think when you have real mastery, you can start saying, I did this for these reasons, I noticed this, I observed that, and I'm moving towards something in that way. And I think the health certification has been evolving in the sense of we're learning more and more how to articulate and refine the NLP that has now been around since 1973.
I think I must admit, when you mentioned the word mastery, and before I did my certification, I thought, well, how's that going to happen? And I was pleasantly surprised. I think both yourself, or Robert, Susie, and Tim, just frame the 5 days so well, and which gives us license to practice. And I was amazed with myself in terms of what I was reacting. It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was great.
And you've been around NLP for a long time.
Nearly 13 years, yeah. And I wouldn't be able to explain how, but I know it's different. So I'm really good about that. One of the questions that usually crops up, and I mentioned this to Robert as well, and he gave his answer, and that's around why would a trainer or a trainer
Someone who's an advanced practitioner?
even consider doing the health certification training?
I think that we have a lot of trainers come through the program. We have several in here.
Yeah.
And I think, A, to refine your skills, B, to work with like-minded people. One of the challenges, I think, for many NLP trainers is that they're the ones everybody in their community looks to for help. Gotcha. But here you have a lot more permission to work with other people. So somebody else is a trainer, and you can work at a level that is really higher. When I think about the NLP health certification, if you think about the practitioner, you have a broad range of people with a broad range of interests and applications and reasons for being there. And then you get people that are really recognizing the value and benefits of NLP, and they're more likely to go on and join a master practitioner program. Yeah. And that, of course, operates at a higher neurological level, and people tend to get deeper skills and work at deeper levels. And then the health certification is even broader than that. Usually the traditional NLP track, as Richard and John started with, practitioner, master practitioner, trainer. And often the health certification is defined as the fourth level of NLP. One person, Don Blackerby, who some of your listeners might know about, he developed a lot of the educational stuff in NLP and since passed on, but he always said this was the fourth level. He called it the graduate school of NLP. That doesn't mean you have to be a total master to come into it.
No.
But it means you're going to learn refinements and skills that I don't really think are taught anywhere else.
No.
And it's many of the experiences people have here are deeply personal. Virtually everybody that goes through this will report having gotten significant personal change.
Yeah.
And I think people often say it was the best of their experiences because they were with so many like-minded people who were operating at a higher level, who really get the neurological levels, the NLP presuppositions, and operate from those presuppositions.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that a trainer can get from it are refinements. And it's not just from Robert and Susie and myself and the resource team. We have really good resource teams, but it's also from each other.
Yes.
Because of the high level of people that are already here. It's interesting because, Teek, you've been in the meeting here, but we've already had several suggestions. Like, that's a great idea, and we put it into it.
Absolutely.
And we're able to evolve NLP here.
Yeah.
And every year we come out with new things that we've never, new nuances or new discoveries or new ideas that haven't quite been defined before.
Yeah. And they're supported to be creative as well. I think you've created a platform and a structure here that they can come up and share their ideas.
And I think it's just because the level of participant is high. It's not like.
Yeah. So,
and by the way, but I don't want to scare people off. You need 13 years of experience to get a lot from it. Probably 2/3 of the people here have received their training their masters in the last year or two.
Yeah. No, the 13 years is more about, it was on my radar. Mm-hmm. It was just the timing had to be right, and that's what it was. And so, yes, absolutely. Now, when I think of the 3 modules, Susie's modules, Robert's, and yours, I was just wondering, would you be able to share something that might be a common thread between all 3 and that encapsulates HCT?
I think one of the spaces that we're holding is the one of mastery. That's kind of like, how can we help people build the kind of mastery they may want to have and achieve their own goals? So I know that's one that Susie and Robert and I talk about a lot. I think it's also, though, some of the common threads that are there are people tend to share a lot of the same values. Most of the people here want to make a difference. We don't get as many people, or we rarely ever get anybody that's here going, I want to do this to make a lot of money, or if I can leverage NLP to control something, I can do better. We don't see so much of that in this program, and that's really nice. So most everybody here is dedicated not only to helping others, but to their own evolution. And I think that theme is supported throughout the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think another thing here, pleasantly surprised by the participants here wanting to know more about what's going on in Europe and continuing being part of that community. So
it is a community, a community idea. And we talk about that a lot. What's going on in other countries and with other people.
Yeah.
And again, human beings, we're all pretty much the same in many ways.
Okay. Again, something around common threads. This time, if you were to think about the people who attend the HCT, what might be a common characteristic that they have?
And I think I've kind of already touched on that in the last question, but I really think it's common characteristics are values of wanting to make a difference, values of wanting to be good at this stuff, values about, and maybe an identity with, really creating something of value with their learnings. Virtually everybody in this room, as I think about everybody in this room, is clearly working on their own evolution as well.
Yeah.
So even though they may be here to be a better doctor or better business person or whatever they are, there's this whole thing about personal excellence, and I want to be the best me I can be. And I think the level of skills that people get here can do that. I think, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but I think this is the place where NLP actually fulfills a lot of its promises. I think you get those promises in practitioner, and it's like you can sense they're there, but you don't have the skills yet or the experience yet.
Yeah.
And the same with master practitioner, you get a lot more of that, but here I think it takes you to a whole different level.
That's great. You spoke on day one about patterns and noticing patterns in change work that we do. So using that frame, I'm just wondering, do you notice any patterns in participants from when they start the HCT and when they finish the HCT, which could encapsulate the training?
Well, I see people being a lot more confident.
Right.
They're able to approach things. They're less worried about how do I do that. I see them be more thorough. I see them knowing the basics a lot better. They're paying attention to sensory acuity and eye accessing cues and the language patterns they hear. So I think people are hearing more. And I think people's work gets a lot more elegant. There's less fishing around for what to do and more making it more simple and direct and accessible.
That's great. Thank you. Participants who've completed the course, what would you say have their attitudes changed around the idea of health and well-being from when they start to when they finish?
I think a lot of people come in with it already, but I think a lot of people really leave with the sense that anything's possible. Usually in a group like this, you'll see certain things happening with certain people where you can see big shifts from when they came in to when they leave in terms of their own health and well-being. Sometimes people have eliminated some pretty serious conditions through changing their beliefs or integrating parts of themselves that were disowned and that kind of thing. And remember one year we had a gentleman who had one leg that was shorter than another one as a result of polio. And when he learned one of the patterns, he continued to do it. And by the end of the training, he wasn't limping anymore. It was noticeable at first. And at the end of the training, he came up and saying, this is unbelievable. He was 45 years old. He said, I had polio when I was 2 years old. This has been my problem for 43 years. And he said, now look, you can't see it and I can't feel it. And it's like, for him, it was such a remarkable thing, but it was for all the rest of us too. He'd been told his whole life, well, you're stuck with that. Learn to live with that. And so I've come to believe, and I think a lot of people here come to believe, anything's possible. It doesn't mean we always know what to do.
Yes. Yeah.
But we do know that it's possible. And if it's possible, then you can't really fail with NLP. You just need to do something that what you're doing isn't working, do something else, as we say.
I wanted to say this to you earlier. I've added, on Thursday afternoon, you came up with 13 strategies
for how to work with people.
Yeah. You mentioned something this morning, which I saw maybe the 14th, and that is make anything possible.
Yeah.
Anything is possible.
But you're needing that attitude.
Yeah.
And I think if I go in, if I'm going to work with you and I think, well, I'm not sure Teak can pull this off, or the doctor said this bad thing's happening, or if you say, well, I've never been able to do it, and I talk to you for a while and I think, well, he seems pretty unconfident, or, if those things were going on.
Yeah.
As soon as I put those in my experience, I'm lowering my chances of working with you. I think one thing Milton Erickson would say is that you want to approach, when you're using hypnosis, confidence, like, we can do it. If I look at you as a client and I think, you've got all these resources, you can do it. And I don't even know how we're going to do it, but I know it's possible for you. And if I believe that in my heart, I believe it in my head, in my gut, that's going to support you and often transfers to you, but it makes a big difference. I remember one time Robert Dilts and I were having a conversation, and somebody asked him, they said, why do you think that, he said, this person just asked, I've done NLP with a lot of people, but with you it worked. Why do you think it worked? And we both said the same thing at almost the same time, because we think it's going to work.
Yeah.
And if we think it's going to work, then that gives the person that support to know that it's possible for them.
And I'd just like to share another strategy that Tim shared with us on Thursday afternoon, which I found very empowering. And it would help a participant explore mastery. And that's, I think, one of the strategies says just having an attitude of wanting to know.
Well,
and that's it.
Well, it's wanting to find out.
That's it, wanting to find out.
So it's, that was from Richard Bandler.
Right.
Richard said many times when I was around him that he said NLP is more of an attitude than a technique.
Mm.
And it's the attitude of sort of being a detective, wanting to find out what's going on here.
Yeah.
That's interesting. When I was first learning NLP, one of my teachers was Connie Ray Andreas. And Connie Ray is a wonderful NLP model, I think, one of the earliest people in NLP. And she was doing in my practitioner, she hadn't been involved in NLP very long at that point, but she was teaching a 6-step reframe, and she kept, whatever she did, the person didn't respond the typical way. And I thought, oh no, the poor Connie Ray is having this horrible experience. But Connie Ray suddenly goes, this is interesting. Usually those questions work. Let's find out what's going on. And it was genuine.
Yeah.
It's like, here's an opportunity to learn something new, to find out, to learn more about human beings and how we function and how this one functions. It was such a great learning for me. I really adopted that. I hope every NLPer adopts that kind of strategy. Richard exemplifies it. He doesn't want to just know some answer to something. He wants to discover how all this works.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. Each trainer brings their own unique style, content, presentation to each module. I believe one of yours is this eye movement integration, or working with eye accessing cues. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, it's something I've practiced with a lot. When I first learned NLP, I stumbled into something with a client where I'll tell the story. I was working for a place called the Family Counseling Center, and a man brought his wife in. They'd been married for 4 months, and he said, basically, we talked about it. He said, she doesn't let me hug her, and if she doesn't change it, I'm going to get a divorce. And as we talked about it, became pretty clear that the way he knew he was loved would be to be touched and hugged and cuddled, and she didn't do that. Her way to know she was loved is by showing him. Mm-hmm. Look all the nice things I do for you. So you could do that for anybody, but you'd only hug and kiss your husband. And especially the hugging was a big deal to him. And then he left. And so I thought, what do I do? And I was in the middle of my first practitioner training. And so I looked at her and said, well, what happens when he hugs you? I'll always remember she looked up here and she went, I don't know, but it's really scary. And I saw her, I just kind of watched her looking. And she said, it feels really scary. And I was learning my NLP predicates and my eye accessing cues then. I thought that she's saying feeling, but looking up. And it didn't seem to be, there's something doesn't fit. And I happened to be holding a pen, and I said, well, move your eyes. And I guided her eyes up to where they were looking. I said, when your eyes are right there, what's going on? And she suddenly screamed. And she said, my dad tried to kill me. And I said, what? And she said, my dad tried to kill me. And then the story unfolded. When she was 4 years old, she's at the Grand Canyon with her mom and dad. North rim of the Grand Canyon, there's a lodge, and there's some steps that go down to this trail at the bottom on the rim of the canyon. Then there's a huge drop off. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how many meters, but it goes down a long way. And the little girl who's 4 runs ahead of mom and dad and starts trying to climb over this little wall that separates this drop off from this trail. And the wall isn't actually that high, but she probably couldn't have scaled it, but dad freaked out. And like most of us, an amateur parent, he ran down, grabbed this little daughter, and he held her. And then he said, you never climb on that wall. See how far down you can fall. Ooh. And then dangles over the Grand Canyon. Of course, what's being associated here is this hug feeling, hands tightly around you while you're being suspended over gosh knows how many meters. And so as the story unfolded, she said, I realized my dad wasn't trying to kill me. He was trying to save me. And it totally shifted. I don't think that would always happen, getting that kind of insight, but it did for her.
Mm.
And when her husband came back, she gave him a big hug. Like I would say, they lived happily ever after. And as far as I know, I never saw them again.
Yeah.
But I think they got what they needed from that one session. So I became very intrigued with eye accessing cues, and I began to explore those, all the things I could find out about them all the time. And what I discovered was your eyes are we all know the window of your soul, but they're also the map of your mind.
Mm.
And so you say, how did something come to be a problem? I'll look somewhere. And if you notice where I look and you get me to exactly that same place, and often can be a matter of micrometers, then you're going to drill right into my experience, and you'll find that. There's a guy, Walter Penfold, I think his name was, back in the 50s, that was beginning to explore this idea of using electrodes in a brain.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And he put it on a certain part of the brain, and somebody have a full-blown re-experience of something. Well, I think this works in a sense like the electrodes. You're going right into that place. And when you're there, you're at the right address for whatever the problem is. So I can help you find the origins of practically anything positive or negative that somebody has.
Yeah.
And so with that, I think sometimes you can be very consistently successful with people because you're going to the right place. And with this woman I was talking about, the woman at the Grand Canyon, she'd had this for she was 24, so that was 20 years. She'd think about how long does an anchor last, 20 years. But whenever she got hugged, guess what flashed through her mind unconsciously? Dangling over the Grand Canyon. Well, no wonder she got scared.
Yeah.
But she'd also put it away in some way, so she didn't recognize that consciously. She just got the feeling.
Mm. And
then she'd attributed the feeling to something else. There's something wrong with me, or he's hugging too hard, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but it's a wonderful skill to have. And,
the words that come to mind are it's simple, effective, and very elegant. And the other thing is, having gone through the ACT and watching it this time round again, you can introduce it or bring it into any other technique you may be involved in.
Oh yeah, exactly.
As a way of just opening up the solution space or just wanting to find out more.
Well, I found that when I have a client come in, they said something's bothering me, I'm not sure why it's bothering me. I'll say, what do you think's causing it?
Mm.
And I'll watch where their eyes go, direct them there, and often it doesn't have to be a big imprint experience from childhood. It could be something that happened a week ago, but they're not quite putting it together yet.
Yeah.
If you hold them in that space and have them discuss what it is they're experiencing, it'll almost always unfold as to what it is.
Mm.
A lot of times with health issues, for example, I've worked with a lot of major health issues, and people say, I've got, my doctor just says I've got MS or something. And I'll say, what do you think's causing that? And usually you get back to some historical set of events that have to do with beliefs and issues that are limiting, and that when people are in the throes of, will have, your body chemistry is concomitant with your thinking. So if I think depressed thoughts, it's going to show up in my body chemistry. Yeah. If I feel out of control, it's going to show up in my body chemistry. One of the things we know is that when people, for example, feel resentful, that they're producing more cortisol. Mm. And so in the last, I guess, 20 years or so, there's been so much research in psychoneuroimmunology and this whole idea of how your mind and body work together that we can't really separate. In the early days, I remember Susie Smith and I would go teach people certain things, and we'd have, like at a hospital, one hospital, the psychiatrist walked out and said, what you're doing is just parlor games. And to his credit, on the second day, it was a 2-day program, he came back and apologized. Yeah. But he said he didn't believe in the mind-body connection. Mm-hmm. He thought you were sort of a ghost in a machine. Of course, I think we've moved way past that nowadays. Yeah. So what NLP was doing where it was in 1982 or 3 or 4 is really different than where we are in 2018. Mm-hmm. And with all the new understandings in general, I think it's helped lift NLP to a new level as well.
Yeah. Okay. Another one of the things that we're going to learn, I think later on this afternoon, is dynamic spin release, which I believe you and Chris have both developed together, which is great. Could you say some more about that, please?
Yeah, dynamic spin release is originally it started out as a discovery, and since then there are a number of techniques that have come from it. But where it came from originally was one morning, Chris, my wife Chris, had Saturday morning. We were reading the paper, drinking coffee, and she said, "I've got this kind of headache." He said, "Will you help me with this?" And we do that with each other a lot. And of course, within NLP, you all might explore this idea, is sometimes I find if you take, for example, a problem like physical pain, and you pull it out and pretend and imagine you pull it out, get a little space from it, then you can dialogue with it and you can have an interaction, find out, well, what's the positive purpose of this? Sometimes you pull it out and you say, if you go from overlap it from a feeling to a visual, you say, well, what does that look like? And so they say, red knotted muscles. So look at those muscles and watch them change into a seagull flying out over the sea. And somehow you morph it into something else. And often the pain goes away.
Yeah.
You say, what does it sound like? And the person might say, well, it sounds like boom, boom, boom. And you go, okay, what's the song you enjoy? They say, well, Beethoven's Fifth. So you go, boom, boom. Then change that into Beethoven's Fifth music. And it'll often change it as well.
Yeah.
So I was going to do something like that. But she pulled it out and she said, "It's really weird. It's like this pink brain, but it's kind of moving around, like it's going, ee. And just then the phone rang. And I was expecting a call, and I said, I'll be right back. But she's just going around like this. I said, try it the other way then. Just anything, I didn't remember hardly saying that, but I came back. And I said, okay, let's see what we can do with that headache. She said, it's gone. And we didn't think that much about it at the moment because we're doing stuff like that all the time. And I thought, well, it's interesting. She did some kind of submodality thing. And but we didn't explore it that much. But later that day, she had a client. And the client kept saying, we're in this vicious loop. And he kept going this way. And then she was actually on the phone. She said, a loop, which way is that loop going? And he kind of showed, he said, try to make it going the other way. And it began to change the way he talked about it. And even later in that same day, she was sitting with somebody and they had one foot crossed and they were kind of moving their foot around like this. And the more they moved the foot, the faster it went, the more they got upset about this thing. And she said, wait a minute, stop moving your foot. And he said, what? And she said, move your foot the other way and talk about it. And they couldn't talk about it at all. So she told me about that night. I thought, that's really interesting. So we began to explore this idea. And we began to notice people have these spinning gestures all the time. You might say, so what's this issue going on with you? I don't know. It's just, and you start seeing these kind of gestures, or you hear them in the language. And English in particular has a lot of them. Yeah. I'm all wound up, I've got this is just spinning out of control. It's twisted, I've got to unwind. I have a glass of wine tonight and unwind, and whatever. And so you hear these idioms as well. So we began to explore this idea, and we had where we would say, okay, get it going so fast it just disappears. And people so they'd take it, they'd reverse it until it got so fast it disappeared. And sometimes people would get like something showing up in its place. Somebody's, I remember one person said, I just kind of visualized the bright sun shining on me, or a landscape or a diamond or something. And so we began to incorporate that in. And so we'd spin something till it reversed and say, your unconscious will give you a metaphor. And virtually everybody would have it spinning in one way, and virtually everybody got some metaphor. And often there were these metaphors that the person never would have thought of consciously.
Yeah.
But when you step back and thought about it, you got absolutely the perfect metaphor for that person. I remember one older gentleman was a piano player, and he was getting arthritis, and he said, yeah, I just think he'll work on that, and work with that. And we said, probably, let's see. So he took the pain and he spun it, and he got back a gift, which was a healed finger. So Chris said, "Oh, well, we'll bring that in." He said he was kind of a character. He had a funny sense of humor, and somebody we knew pretty well.
Mm.
But he said, "No, I want to send it out on an adventure." We go, "Okay." And so he sends it out on an adventure, and it comes back and had a diamond ring on it. But for him, that was very significant because it wasn't just the healed finger. When he brought it in, somehow the arthritic finger was a symbol of his getting older. He was 72 or 3.
Right.
He's a jazz piano player, and it's kind of like he didn't shine, he thought, anymore. That let him shine.
Yeah.
So our unconscious will give us these amazing gifts.
Yeah.
Later we were teaching this, somebody said, well, Bandler's been doing this for a long time, so we went and looked that up. And so, yeah, Bandler does have some similar techniques where he reverses the spin, but dynamic spin's got a whole set of other elements to it that has to do with metaphor, with using hypnotic language patterns and a number of things. And it's a thing that I think Chris and I use probably more than anything else in our own practices because it works so consistently.
Yeah.
With anything from traumas to often physical pain to emotional issues.
Conflict.
Kids can do it. You can work with conflict. So again, content is never the issue with people, never the full issue. It's almost always with the form that they put it into.
And these two, integration movement and dynamic spin release, occurs to me they would be ideal in a working environment, in an office, an organization. Have you had any experience of that?
Oh yeah. It's well, yeah, I'll give you one of our students is a CEO of a hospital now, but for a while she was the chief nurse officer,
right,
which is like the third in line for the clinical staff in the hospital. And she had a fairly big staff, and she got really good at spinning things out. So she'd get an employee in trouble, and she was very good at rapport, very good at NLP, was a health certified person, and she had the trust and confidence of a lot of her employees. And she told us she did that all the time with staff when they get upset. And in a complex environment like a hospital, there's a lot of emotion and difficulty. Sometimes patients will be abusive, or even patients' families will say, "Why didn't you say yes?" And it's like people are pretty traumatized.
Yeah.
So she did it. She said pretty routinely. With eye accessing cues, you can do it anywhere. Once you know how to do it, you can see what's going on.
Yeah.
You don't always have to go like that and say, "Hold it."
Yeah.
But if you had something, I might notice a pattern there. And when you saw your eyes go to a certain place, say, "What's that? What's there right there?" Freeze yourself. And so you can, that can be very helpful. The using the eye accessing cues to access things, you want to do it in the proper environment with respect. Because I don't want to suddenly pop somebody into some imprint when they were 3 years old and they were traumatized by something.
Okay. Perhaps I don't know if there's any more you can say about how content of the HCT is used in the work environment. In an organisational setting for health and well-being, because that's a big topic of interest.
If you think of it, in NLP metaphors, Virginia, mostly from Virginia, Satira, but we've got these different parts of ourselves. And Virginia used to do things like parts parties. I never got to meet Milton or spend time specifically with him, but I was fortunate enough to get to work with Virginia Satir, a student of hers, not work with her as a client, but be a student of hers. And Virginia used to do these things like parts parties. And, she would always say, well, your problems come from these disowned parts of yourself. And when you integrate them and make them whole, which was a lot of what she did, you can make a huge difference. And she was just a wonderful therapist. And I learned an awful lot from her. But when you think of yourself as there are all these yous that make you up, you're a system made up of a bunch of systems. But then we're in bigger systems. We're in a family system. And so you can apply the same things to a family system that you can to an individual in many ways. Organizations can have imprints. Yeah. And I think nations can have imprints.
Wow, yes.
And
never thought of that.
In some ways, I think, we're getting imprints right now in the United States with all the division that's going on. And that division, that imprint's going to need to be healed, or it's going to be something in the system that continues to create issues.
Yeah.
So organizations are the same way.
Right.
So you get a business, it can be the same way. So I think anything that you can apply to an individual, if you think about it in a broader context, can be applied to helping an organization heal or have well-being.
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
even if it is well, to make it even better.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. How does the content of the HCT reflect in a person's healing journey? If somebody's going on a healing journey, how does that...
Well, we address that very specifically. For example, Chris, who often teaches in the health sort of in the HCT, had a health crisis, and when she went through it, and then we identified 25 things that she did. She kept a journal, and kind of organized a health template so that people would know what to do if they were faced by a health challenge. And so there's a whole set of things you might take into account. So often when any of us get a health challenge, even an NLP master practitioner, it's like deer in the headlights. Oh, I've got this diagnosis. It's frightening. And then they kind of go past it. And this is the time to work on yourself. So there are a number of things you can do. People in this group, some of them have been working on some significant health issues. I think some of them will get better. And sometimes I'm thinking of a few years ago, we had a woman this wonderful person from Canada in our training, and she had late stage cancer when she came to the training. And we worked with her, both Robert and I worked with her as a demonstration person. And she lived a lot longer than they expected, which was beautiful. But when she died, I got this beautiful letter from her husband thanking me. And he said that she wanted me to know that she died well. And she didn't think she would have without having gone through this program.
Yeah. Now, also the other day, I think it was yesterday, you mentioned that we were doing forgiveness. And you mentioned that was an important element in any healing journey.
Yeah.
Are there any other commonalities that you found or specific?
Well, stress, obviously.
Right.
And, if you have a limiting belief, or, if you think of emotional challenges that we have, all those things are going to create a stress environment. And with stress, there are over 20 different catatoxins or stress hormones that all can wreak havoc in certain ways. If of course, there are a number of things you can do to help with that. People who do transcendental meditation can often stay healthier because they're doing something to help with that stress. And what NLP can really help with are things like not doing whatever it is that creates the stress in the first place. So I think stress is, as we know, is the basis for most disease.
Yeah. And so that, and I think elegantly leads into, because one of the main things with the HCT is about this idea of practice. Practices. And
yeah, and I know what you're saying. And I think I can answer the question. I know we're kind of running out of time here, but just to say fairly quickly, of course, we know about NLP, and sometimes the drama of NLP is really exciting. Like somebody comes in with dynamic spin or the NLP trauma process. Somebody comes in, they're in the state, and you change it, and they don't ever get the state back. And it's like, it's wow. It's like, look at the change I just made. I couldn't look off the top of the building. Now I can, walk the high wire. You get these one-time changes that are dramatic. Yeah. But so much of what life is about are about adopting practices that support our well-being. Like, they found recently in medicine, people walk between 8,000 and 10,000 steps really improved their odds of not getting Alzheimer's disease, or improving from Parkinson's disease. Yeah. So one of the practices that Chris and I do is we try to walk every day, at least 8,000 steps. Right. I meditate every day. So there are practices that we adopt. Robert Dilts has a practice, and probably some NLPers out there have noticed he's written 20 some odd books. But part of his practice is writing every morning. Yeah. And part of his practice is he runs every day too. And a practice is different than just an activity because you put it in kind of a sacred place. Yeah. It's part of my being. It's what I do. And I think building healthy practices is a part of really having health and well-being.
Well, Tim, thank you very much. We are running out of time. Thank you for making the time. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in and being with us. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
And
Thank you.
And thank you, Tick,
Thank
for
you, sir.
guiding me through this.
Okay.